All right, so Andrea Miller, come on down. I'll find you. Here it is. Andrea Miller is the president of the National Institute for Reproductive Health and its Action Fund, which sponsored this panel, which builds power at the state and local level to change public policy. She's a nationally recognized expert in reproductive rights and women's health, and you have served for more than 2 decades in leadership as a consultant, a host of a nonprofit advocacy and philanthropic organization. This is your life, Andrea Miller.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much. Thank you all for staying and for being here for this film. As Melissa said, we are sponsors of this. National Institute for Reproductive Health sponsored this film tonight, and we are just thrilled to have done so and want to thank the Athena Film Festival. We've had numerous experiences here at Athena and love coming here. And I can't tell you how happy I am to see so many seats filled today, given that it was a little gross out today, to say the least. So I just want to say a few words, and then I'm going to bring up a really fabulous second panel tonight. There are many reasons that we really jumped at the opportunity to sponsor this film. First, as you heard, as you saw, there is no question that it's exceedingly timely, perhaps more than any of us could have imagined or would like to see being the case. And I just think it does such an incredible job of portraying what it was like for women before Roe and the harm that's caused when abortion is considered a criminal act. But I think more important to me, and I think you've seen pieces of that already in this first panel, is it doesn't serve up the sort of doom and gloom narrative. Instead, it really, instead of being that like horrible cautionary tale, you just saw the Janes lifts up this sort of untold history, this sort of, you maybe found out about it if you saw Laura Kaplan's book, or if you happen to have a reason to have delved into the history of abortion in this country. But it really also shows how people can come together. I mean, that was such a good theme, I think, that this last panel touched on, even at the risk of prosecution themselves, to provide illegal abortions that were safe and effective and done with dignity and respect. And no matter what the laws are now or in the future, that's what women and anyone who can become pregnant can and should deserve. And that's really why the National Institute for Reproductive Health exists. I am not going to do much more other than to say I'm so thrilled to have the kind of panel I do today. And really the reason we're bringing this panel up is we don't want you to be discouraged. I believe that hopefully at the end of this evening, you will go out there and realize the same agency, that same sense that you can do something even against dire circumstances. That's what I think this movie helps us to see and understand. And so with that, I want to introduce this incredible panel. Some of you are going to have to get out of your seats from funky places, but I'm going to first, I just have to say it's such an honor for me to introduce and bring forward 3 people who are just extraordinary in their roles in this work. I am privileged to call them both colleagues and friends. So first I want to ask Kitty Colbert, whom you heard about earlier. Kitty is a nationally recognized, long-standing reproductive rights attorney. She's credited with saving Roe versus Wade in 1992 in a case that we worked on, even though I'm not a lawyer, we worked on together. She is perhaps more importantly an advocate and a political animal at heart. She's also my mentor, and so I get to say things like that. And she recently co-authored the book Controlling Women, What We Must Do Now to Save Reproductive Freedom. And so we're going to hear some about that. Second, I want to call up Dr. Antoinette Danvers, who is a practicing OBGYN, family planning specialist, and innovative healthcare leader at Montefiore Health Center and at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Dr. Danvers has more than a decade of clinical care and teaching experience. She's also an advocate, and that's one of the reasons, all of these are reasons why she is a member of the National Institute for Reproductive Health Board of Directors. And she's especially passionate about changing healthcare so that you're really addressing the disparate care and the burdens that really fall on marginalized communities. So thank you, Dr. Danvers, for being here. And finally, but not by no means least, is Roxanne Sataki, who is the Director of Community Engagement for the Women's Centers. The Women's Centers are a group of independent abortion providers that specialize in both first and second trimester abortion care in Connecticut, Georgia, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. She's based in Cherry Hill at the clinic there, and she helps coordinate the state's reproductive health coalition called Thrive New Jersey, which NIRH is proud to also be a member of. So welcome, Roxanne, and thank you.
Thank you.
So I thought I'd do 2 rounds of questions, and then I really do hope we can get some of you to step up to the mic. I thought we'd maybe start with some context setting, where we are now with these folks, because I think where we are now says a lot about where we can go next. So I think I'm going to start at the end of the row here, Kitty. Obviously, the film showed the days before Roe, and there's a lot of talk about it really being on the chopping block. But can you sort of, given your expertise, given the sort of setting the stage on what's happening in the courts right now, what's going on in the Supreme Court, the Texas case, the Mississippi case, what's your take on what we've seen recently, and where do you think this is headed?
All right, so I'm going to be really clear.
I don't think your mic's on.
I'm going to be really clear. Really, really clear. If any one of you walks out of this room believing that Roe and Casey will survive, give it up now. Roe is dead. The states, in as early as, any time between now and the end of June, the current Supreme Court is likely to, and I'm going to say that just because I'm a lawyer, but really I believe the current Supreme Court will eliminate a federal constitutional right to choose abortion and return the issue to every individual state to ban abortion as they see fit. Now, that's a very depressing statement, and we're going to talk more later about the fact that there's a whole lot we can do. But let me just give you a sense of what that means. It used to be, and I think many advocates thought, that the Supreme Court would overrule Roe and Casey and permit states to ban abortion, and then the states would pass the laws to ban abortion. No. 21 states have already done so. Okay? So we don't have a choice to defeat the bills in those 21 states. What does that mean? It means from Georgia, probably west to the western end of Texas, and maybe even Oklahoma, north from Idaho, all the way to the Mexican border, 21 states at least will ban abortion at some point during pregnancy. And if those bans, start later in pregnancy, they will soon start earlier in pregnancy. So those that are at 15 weeks will be probably throughout pregnancy within the year or 2 years if they have the power to do so. Now, the good news is there are another 21 states that are safe states that will preserve the legal right to choose abortion. Better than the days before Roe, which really were limited to, a handful, 6 or 8 in the days before Roe. So that's good news. And we need to talk about what you need to do in those safe states to help the women where abortion is banned. But I also think, and I think this is really important, we also need to think about this as a long-term struggle. That winning back the rights we are losing now is not going to happen overnight. And all of us are very used to things happening right away. But the only way to restore national protection for the right to choose abortion is to elect a Congress that has a filibuster-proof majority to pass a federal statute or to pass a federal constitutional amendment, okay? Or the other option is to chip away at the bad laws state by state and begin to flip the legislatures of those states, okay? And that is hard work. But let me just assure you that it is doable work and you can make it happen. And I am going to talk more later about all of that. But just the bottom line is we're in a big, big mess. And we need to get busy to create a badass social justice movement that's going to change that mess and we again have the political power to make a change. So let me leave it at that.
Thanks, Kitty. And that's exactly the work NIRH does. So I'm excited we're going to talk about it. So Dr. Danvers, I think one of the things maybe that surprises people when they first hear about the Janes is that they actually performed abortion safely and effectively for so many people without being trained and credentialized as medical providers. Of course, not to say there's anything wrong with that, because you are amazing. And we're very glad you have all of those things. But it paints a really different picture, I think, than what people may have known otherwise about the days before Roe. And, you know, given what Kitty just talked about, it kind of begs the questions: what are the options for safe and safe abortion care and effective abortion care if we see a proliferation of bans that we already have, and if they actually go into effect, which is really the only thing that has protected us so far. So as an OBGYN, as someone who provides abortions, can you just speak to the safety of abortion, early abortion, some of what people got, you know, a taste of, but also there was a reference earlier in the previous panel. What role do you as a physician think that medication abortion, including self-managed medication abortion, might play in a future kind of without Roe?
Of course, thank you. So first, let me say,
I think you have to bring the mic up toward you a little closer.
thank you. First, let me say that the place abortion sits within the medical community today looks extremely different from before Roe. Its abortion care is integrated in OBGYN training across the country. We have specialists who are not only interested in providing abortion beyond, up to 24 weeks and beyond. They are in this work for the advocacy, for the research, and to continue the education, to educate other providers. And so the landscape of the community that deliver this care will look different post-Roe than it did in 1972. With that said, with this community of doctors and scientists who care so passionately about abortion care, we have made significant strides in the safety of abortion. Complications from abortion are extremely rare. We saw rapid decrease in the number of septic abortion once it was legalized. But even further, abortion is safer than carrying a pregnancy to term. The mortality from abortion is significantly less than carrying a pregnancy to term. So having abortion care being available is not only important for women who do not want to be pregnant, it's also important for all women who can get pregnant, because this is a mechanism to save women's lives. And so in addition, with the advent of the scientific research, we now have really effective medical management of abortion. Women can safely use medical abortion up to 10 weeks, which means that 80% of women seeking abortion today are under 10 weeks and would be able to do so with just medication. And so there is a real opportunity for self-managed abortion to deliver safe abortion care to places and to women who are in places where they do not otherwise have access. So I think, we got a lot from the time that we had Roe, and it leaves us better prepared to work together to make women safe post-Roe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Roxanne, speaking of providing abortion care in this current climate and sort of thinking about the future, can you tell us a bit about what it's like for your patients at the women's centers, what they're facing, insights you can share? I mean, you sit at the clinic in Cherry Hill, but you've got the clinic in Atlanta. There's a clinic in Philly. Atlanta, Georgia is one of the states that's passed multiple bans on abortion that have yet to take effect. That's the other thing. Not only do they pass one, those 21 states passed like layer cake. It's like the layer cake of abortion bans. There are like 6 or 7 of them in some of these states. Philly has, people think Pennsylvania very progressive, not so much. A lot of restrictions on the books there, a lot of hurdles women have to go over to get abortions. So, tell us a little bit about that experience now, what that might suggest, and what kind of reverberations. I think it's very interesting to think about with Texas. We're at month 6 of abortions actually being banned in Texas, right? So are you seeing reverberations of that, and what does that sort of suggest?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. And wow, am I feeling really grateful and proud to be part of this legacy of like badass women who are providing abortion, and to be here tonight. So thank you all. But I got my start at the Women's Center's clinics about 10 years ago in our advocacy center, which is where we answer all of the phone calls that come in for our clinics in Georgia, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And I just didn't know before I took that job how absolutely wildly different the landscape can be state to state to state to state. And so a phone call, for someone who was seeking an abortion in New Jersey might take 5 minutes to schedule. But in Pennsylvania or Georgia, we're talking about 25 to 45-minute phone calls because there are so many hoops and so many logistical barriers put in place that we have to walk people through. And I think right now it's really unclear to people what the landscape of abortion is. There are more and more and more people calling us every week that are asking, is abortion legal? And there is a desperation that I saw on this film that we hear from our patients that are calling us of, can I get an abortion? And I can't schedule an abortion next week. In Georgia, it's illegal. I'll be too far along, if you schedule me past 6 weeks. But we know, because our Atlanta Women's Center is involved in the lawsuit suing the state of Georgia to ban that 6-week, abortion ban that made it through the legislature. It's not in place, right? And people can still get abortions in Texas through 6 weeks. But legality and, even the Roe precedent, it never meant that abortion was accessible necessarily. It may be legal, but there are still a number of logistical, financial, stigma, barriers in place. And we'll talk about what people can do to kind of navigate them. But it's true today that we're seeing what we saw pre-Roe. People are traveling, across the country to access their abortions. There are hundreds of thousands of people who live in the states that are poised to ban abortion after the Roe precedent, or if and when the Roe precedent comes down. And right now in Texas, there are tens of thousands of women just this year who have sought abortion out of the state. And we've seen them at all of our clinics, including as far as Connecticut. So we have people getting on airplanes, flying, halfway across the country to get a medication abortion. That literally, they could self-administer at home safely over the counter, but they literally can't do it because the doctor's hands are tied. And I feel for our colleagues at Whole Women's Health who are talking to patients every single day and having to walk them through this and turn them away. And how heartbreaking that is to know that you can provide this care. You provided it yesterday, but all of a sudden it's pulled out from under you. And yeah, it's a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you to your colleagues. Antoinette, I just want to go to you next again and say, so we think about sort of, again, the kind of how do we move the ball forward and what's the future? You think about the patients that you serve, you think about the colleagues, you started to touch on this, but what would you want this audience to know about what you could see a future looking like and how to move the ball forward, given the advances that you mentioned have already been made during the years in Roe and during the years of legal abortion? Sort of what do you see the next phase being from the vantage point of being a provider and a researcher?
Right. So I can't help think about the future of abortion without dissociating the potential for the inequity. And we saw that in the movie when we start to see the patchwork of states, some states having access and some places don't. It's clear who's most likely to be affected. And I think the one stride we didn't make in these years was bridging that gap and making access more equitable. Shortly after Roe, we know they passed the Hyde Amendment that took away the ability for the federal government and Medicaid to pay for abortion. So even though it had been legal for many women, it has been inaccessible. And I think in this next iteration, like this new opportunity, we have to revisit how we make abortion accessible. We have to think about how to make it accessible for everyone, including women who are poor, who can't travel for medication abortion. We have to think about innovative ways to get them what they need where they are. And, I think after watching this movie in my mind, I'm like, that has to be easier than what you all did. And I'm looking at Abby here. So if you could overcome that insurmountable task, we should be able to find a way to make abortion accessible, and have people who can't travel, can't get to those states that have access to abortion. If you're on the East Coast, people are traveling from Texas to New York and New Jersey. This is not something that's feasible for the majority of women who are seeking abortion care today. And so this new iteration has to have an equity lens to it. And I want to mention this sort of interesting fact. I like numbers. The rate of abortion has been declining because we've also made strides in contraception. But there's one demographic that we still see a rise, and that's in the poorest women. And so just want to just put a lens to that as well.
Thank you. It's a really good point. I'm going to go to Roxanne, then I'm going to come to Kitty, and then we're going to try to open it to the audience. So Roxanne, as I mentioned, we've been able to work closely together with the Thrive New Jersey Coalition to try to secure abortion rights in Jersey. Yes, we actually had to do that work, and expand access by changing the laws and regulations. And people might have thought, well, you were in New Jersey, that must be fine, it must be safe, it must be great. By the way, it took us 10 years to change the law in New York too. Just did that a couple years ago. But tell us a little bit about, so people understand, even in these quote unquote good states, what the changes were and are that were needed, what we've gotten so far, and what we can do next and need to do next to get at this accessibility question that Antoinette raised. And there may be some of you who are in New Jersey or know people in New Jersey, so there's work to be done, and there's work still to be done in New York. You can always ask me about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so in New Jersey, our Cherry Hill Women's Center worked in partnership with our Thrive New Jersey Coalition, which is a coalition of over 70 organizations throughout the state who work on both abortion access, also contraception issues, sex education, menstrual equity, maternal justice, because it's all interconnected, right? And the fight in New Jersey for reproductive rights should not have been as hard as it was, but it really has been an uphill battle and quite a challenge. And I think even when we look at these, what we're calling haven states today, there's no state in the United States where it's easy, right, to get an abortion, especially if you're someone who is poor, especially if you're someone who lives in a rural area. And believe it or not, in South Jersey, where I live, there's a lot of farmland, there's a lot of rural areas, and there are people who travel 90 minutes by car, which is not accessible. And especially if you don't have a car, we're talking about a 4.5-hour public transportation ride. And a part of the reason in New Jersey specifically why abortion access is and continues to be, we made some big changes, but there's still an implementation period, right? Is because we had really terrible regulation on the books that sort of flew under the radar. Some of the early, what we call trap regulations or targeted regulations of abortion providers in New Jersey included a physician-only requirement, included gestational age limitations, included facility requirements requiring abortion providers to be ambulatory surgical center facilities. So all things that made the provision of accessing care extremely expensive, extremely convoluted, and something that just not many people are setting up shop to do, because it's really hard to make that happen. In addition, we have folks for whom accessing abortion is incredibly difficult, overcoming the financial barriers of being able to pay for an abortion out of pocket, travel halfway across the state, get childcare, time off. We have people who don't have paid time to be able to make an appointment and get to the clinic. So in New Jersey Thrive, New Jersey Coalition, one of our biggest initiatives was to push forth the Reproductive Freedom Act, which was a huge, incredible legislation that would have both solidified reproductive rights, but also gotten at pretty much every barrier we had left in the state. Financial barriers, insurance coverage for folks who are undocumented, removing all of the restrictions on the books, removing our criminal statutes that could be used to prosecute someone for the end of pregnancy. I think pre-Roe, we look at, abortion, the risks being, medical risks. But in this next phase, it's the risk of criminality, right? And who is over surveilled, which, communities, specifically communities of color, who are more likely to have to engage in police and have harmful engagements with police. So that bill did not pass, but what we were able to successfully do was pass something called the Freedom of Reproductive Choice Act, which is a good first step. That bill solidified reproductive rights, so we know that New Jersey will hold. And it required that the Department of Banking and Insurance will do a study about the affordability of abortion in the state, so that the state can bring down mandates for private insurance. New Jersey is a state where Medicaid does cover for the cost of an abortion, but there are plenty of people who have private insurance policies that do not cover, or they cover, but they have excessively high deductibles. And so it's not affordable. If you have a $5,000 deductible and you're trying to pay for a $500 abortion, that insurance is not going to cover it. And we did have a couple of successes on the way as well. We were able to advocate with the legislature to enact the Reproductive Health Fund, which will cover for prenatal care services and contraception for folks who are undocumented in our state. And we have a path toward expanding that for abortion coverage. So we're going to get that work done this year. And we also were able to advocate with the Board of Medical Examiners to rescind the regulations that were basically abortion exceptionalism. They treated abortion completely differently than all other types of medical care. And research shows us that that actually decreases the quality of care. And the Board of Medical Examiners heard us loud and clear, and we were able to rescind some of those gestational age limitations, the physician only requirements. And so now we will have all qualified medical providers providing abortion care in New Jersey. So we're looking towards a future where we are going to start seeing a huge increase in patients. And so that's big, making sure that we are bolstering our abortion infrastructure. But we really want to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. And that's where the affordability, the logistical barriers, I think also the stigma and the violence, right, from the same white supremacists that we've seen in this video that are targeting our clinics is going to come in.
Thank you. So Kitty, I'm going to go to you and then we're going to open it up. I mentioned the name of your book at the beginning when I introduced you, and this is the softball to you that I know you wanted so badly, which is what inspired you to write it and what do you want people to know, and more importantly, what do you want them to do?
So in writing the book, I think the first thing I want to say is that we have always, in working on this issue, thought about the right to choose abortion as a reciprocal right. That is, it's the right to terminate a pregnancy, but it's also the right to carry a pregnancy and to raise a family with dignity and in health. And so it seems to me we have an opportunity now to go back and rethink about the policy alternatives that both support abortion and support safe pregnancy and support family creation and family formation in a way that's equitable. And I think we really need to do that. But to me as well, I think more than anything, this is a question of political power. Now, our opponents have known that for years, and they have worked for the last 50 years to not only build political power within their movement, but to build political power within the Republican Party. So I'm real clear that when I started working on this issue, which is almost 40 years ago, the right to choose abortion was really not a Republican and Democratic issue. There were pro-choice Republicans, there were anti-choice Democrats. You know, Barry Goldwater was pro-choice. I mean, he was one of the most conservative Republicans in his era. But today, that's not true. Today, the abortion issue breaks down on party lines. And that means when Republicans are in control of legislatures, and I can say this because I'm not being part of a nonprofit organization, I am speaking for myself. When the Republican Party is in control, there's going to be bad things that happen on this issue. And when Democrats are in control, better things could happen on this issue.
But you got to push them.
That's right. I'm not going to say it will happen. I'm just saying it's possible because you have the votes and the leadership. So that's point one. Point two is any number of policies on both ends of this issue that we can work on. But you can't enact anything unless you've got the votes. I frequently have said, arguing in front of the Supreme Court is a lot like Sesame Street. Why? Because you got to learn to count. The only number that matters in the Supreme Court is 5. But the only number that matters in a state legislature is the majority. And sometimes a supermajority, because there's filibuster rules, okay? And therefore, we have to start being much more strategic about how we flip from red to blue, not only the states that are bad, but all those purple states in the middle. Remember, I said 21 bad ones, 21 good ones. Well, that leaves a few in the middle, okay? My own state of Pennsylvania being one of those. So we have to think about how to get active in politics. Now, I have to say to you all that being active in political efforts, in electoral politics, does not necessarily come easy among our supporters. I am guessing that many of you have never been active in a political campaign. Many of you have. But your daughters may not have, or your sons may not have. And therefore, it's really important for us to rethink politics as electoral politics and be much more strategic. And one of the things that I think is important is that you in New York, or any of those safe states, Oregon or Washington or California or New Mexico or wherever, Illinois, you can work in state legislative campaigns in all of those bad states, okay? You can do it by coming to visit and knocking on doors, which is the best way to change people's mind or get people to vote. But you also can do it by texting and getting on phone banks and organizing your friends to be on phone banks. And we need to do that. And I want you all to think about the state of Georgia, okay? The state of Georgia that sent 2 Democrats to the US Senate this last election. Why? Because the activists on the ground have spent 10 years registering people to vote, working in electoral campaigns, having extraordinary leadership. But the important lesson in all of that is it is doable. Virginia flipped from red to blue, then they flipped back from blue to red. Okay, why? Because it's very close. And many, many, many electoral campaigns are decided by very small numbers of votes. I just counted in Pennsylvania, I think I counted 14 districts in the last, in 2020, that were decided by under 1,000 votes. Okay, that's not very many people. Okay, that's, you know, that's an elementary school parents group. So it's doable, but it takes lots and lots of work. So I'm with all of the rest of this panel about the importance of helping women who are in need of services, but you also have to get political on a very granular level. And I'm hoping that if nothing else, by the time you leave here tonight, you will find ways to say, I'm going to spend, you know, an hour a week making phone calls for a state legislative campaign around the country.
Thanks, Kitty. Questions? All the way back, glasses.
I want to thank you all for your leadership in this area. My question is, if in those restrictive states that are tearing down, let's say, the time when women work, will those residency programs stop teaching the doctors how to perform them? And if so, we're going to have a whole generation of physicians who will not be able to do abortion even later if they want. So they want to be trained and trained.
Thank you for that question, because it's certainly something that we are thinking about. One of the, you know, we're strategizing how we can get trainees. We have mechanisms to have trainees come into our sites, so the 21 states that do have training programs can host trainees from restrictive states. That mechanism already exists. And so we are thinking about ways in which we can expand that. There are certainly real challenges. And so the decisions to participate in that is really coming from a place of how important we think this issue is and how serious it is that we continue to have trainees for our fellowship programs. It is possible that there will be inability to train an abortion provider who is subspecializing in performing abortion and not get that experience in the state in which they're being trained. And so we're certainly thinking about it, and we are strategizing how to make sure that does not happen. And so this is one of the ways we're thinking about the next steps right now.
Right here.
I'm very involved with Planned Parenthood Cuts and Products, which is mine's over there.
So what we were thinking was that we would, because telemedicine is a big thing for many aspects of medical services, that, for example, that we could have a doctor or, a nurse practitioner do telemedicine with the abortion pill. But I think one of you said that that may not be possible because of the laws. And my other follow-up to that is I'm very concerned that Texas, I don't even want to talk about that state, but Texas, not only has their abhorrent laws, but they also have the vigilante thing.
Right.
And there are other states that are adopting the vigilante thing. So even though, if you told me technically people at Planned Parenthood Hudson-Peconic could do telemedicine for medical abortion, but if you're in a vigilante state, then if your neighbor knows you're pregnant and then suddenly you're not anymore. I mean, there are just so many things that we want to try to help people in other states, but it seems that's not going to be as easy as we like to think.
I can pick up some of that, and then I may punt some of it to Kitty as well. The telemedicine question is a really good one, and it is possible to do telemedicine into other states where it is legal, but if it's illegal, technically, you are breaking the law of that state. Now, whether, for instance, New York's a great example. You're right. I'm sure that, like many providers, you're thinking about this. Would it be possible for the state of Texas, for example, to prosecute someone from New York? Probably you could get the government of New York to say, we're not letting anyone be extradited. We're not going to let anybody, so there are ways that you can get at it, but technically, if it's illegal in that state, if the abortion happens in that state, then you're practicing medicine into that state. So there's going to be a lot of gray area, but I think there's also a lot of willingness to push the envelope when the stakes are really high. I think the vigilante question, though, is one that I definitely want Kitty to speak to.
Well, let me add two quick things. One is, yes, it's probably across the line to send a pill if you know that person is in
that
a state. On the other hand, what's been happening in Texas is a lot of the women have been getting post office boxes in other states or getting general delivery of the pills in a close by, across a border, decent state. That, I have to say, the creativity that's going on is extraordinary, and it will continue. Two ways around that is to flood good states with as much availability of the abortion pill as possible so friends can give it to friends. And second, to make sure people have really good legal help should there be problems. Plan C is a website that kind of lays out people's options. I would urge people to look at that. But the other piece that's really important is, if you don't need surgical abortion, and again, medication abortion is only good up to 10 weeks. So we're not talking about all abortions, but 80% of them. But the more we can flood medication and increase the use of medication, but it's not going to be without risk. Right. And like the women of Jane, we have to understand that there are risks on these things when you're breaking the law or when the law is unclear. And I'm not in a position to advocate people to break the law, But you get my drift.
Right. Exactly. And I would just add the risk is also to the women themselves. There have been a lot of women actually in recent years who've been prosecuted, not only for self-managing, but also for even miscarriages. And so there is risk, but I think there's a lot of creativity. I think Katie's absolutely right. So keep those conversations going. Don't give up on it. Find that creative solution. Other questions? No. Wow. Oh, here we go.
I was just wondering, as Katie mentioned, how do we, we need to mobilize and really be kind of on the ground doing a lot of tedious work, but I feel like there's a large culture of like nihilism going around with our current generation's really political apathy or disillusionment with governmental structures. So how do we kind of bypass that and mobilize you guys have any?
Roxanne, you do this every day, so let's give that to you, and then I think we're going to have to wrap it up. But thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And I think being in this work in general, sometimes it's easy to think about, like, how do you face doing this another day? But I think connecting with the folks on the ground who are doing the work, they can share with you recent wins, and we have to celebrate our wins. The only reason that we're mailing MABs is because of the long-term advocacy that has happened to change the FDA's rulings. That just happened last year to allow us to dispense medication abortion by mail. So I think, really uplifting when we can, centering that abortion in and of itself is, I think, I heard someone in the film say this, it's a liberatory act. And for me, it's a way to push back against the increasing, creeping, like fascist state that we're facing. It's a way to, say F you to the government. It's a way to say, like, you want me to do this thing, but I'm not going to do it. And so I think having that ability to just be able to push back is really good. But, the folks on the ground that are doing the work, there's ways to plug in that are easy. And I think once you start doing it and you see that it's effective and you see that just a little bit can go a really, really long way. We have folks that help us, to do some of this political education that Kitty was talking about every year, in addition to our patients' medical discharge instructions. They get a civic health discharge instruction, that talks about, hey, was your abortion really hard to get? Here's why. And here's what you can do. If this is the moment that you want to be radicalized, here's how to get involved. And so there's a lot of work to do, and know that none of it is done in vain. Every single bit is life-changing, even if it's just a one person. But there is a huge tide, and the opposition is not getting tired or turning down. And so we have to just turn up the heat.
And I would just add, organizing is fun. Okay, I mean, we're sounding so dire here, but the reality is getting active is the best antidote to all of the depressing news we are facing. And it's fun. You can do it with your friends. You can go out together and have a, call in, but whatever it is. And I think that what we learned from this movie is the women who changed the lives of other women were very, very ballsy and had some satisfaction from doing that. And I think that's the key.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Go out and get radical. Go organize.